Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's show is all about my favorite subject, food, and more specifically, desserts. Our very special guest is an internationally renowned, multi award winning pastry chef, television star, educator, and author whose name has become synonymous with culinary perfection, both in the sweet and savory departments. She became a household name on the Food Network, where she hosted her hugely successful TV shows, Sugar, Kitchen Equipped, Fresh with Anna Olson, which won a Grand Remi Award for Best Lifestyle Programming, Bake with Anna Olson, Inspired with Anna Olson, and the online series Sweet Something. Her TV shows have aired in over 190 countries. And of course, we all know her as one of the judges on the Great Chocolate Showdown and the Junior Chef Showdown. Her incredibly popular YouTube channel has over 1.4 million subscribers. She's written 11 best-selling cookbooks, including Sugar, Bake with Anna Olson, Back to Baking, Set for the Holidays, Baking Day, which won a gold medal at the Taste Canada Cookbook Awards, and my personal favorite, In the Kitchen with Anna, New Ways with the Classics. She's also co-authored two wonderful books with her husband, Chef Michael Olson, entitled In on the 20 Cookbook, and another one of my all-time favorites, Anna and Michael Olson Cook at Home. And she's just released her highly anticipated brand new book entitled Anna Olson's Baking Wisdom, The Complete Guide, Everything You Need to Know to Make You a Better Baker, which is an all-encompassing compendium and truly a master class for every baking enthusiast. I'm delighted to welcome the one and only chef Anna Olson to our show. Anna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Harvey. This is going to be fun.
I've been so looking forward to this. I have to start by asking you, how in the world, after studying political science and sociology in university, did you end up as a pastry chef?
Oh, it will. That's a great question to ask. And I know so many career pastry chefs and bakers who did not fall into it as a first career, but it took a second or third career to find it. And it was just simply baking was always a hobby. It was a love. It was growing up, it was my after school activity. My inspiration came from my grandmother because she loved to bake. So it just was so much a part of my life that I couldn't see it. And so after working in banking for a few years, I worked for a portfolio management company in Toronto. And it sounds like, oh, well, all I had to do was erase the first letter N to go from banking to baking. But I did have a moment. I have what I call my muffin epiphany. And so when I was working in banking, it was the early to mid 90s, and markets were all over the place. We were seeing interest rates. What we're seeing now is just a fraction of what they were there. Currencies were all over the place. And I found myself up in the middle of the night, stress baking, because I couldn't sleep. And it was the only way I could get my head cleared, because I focused on making banana muffins. And as I was putting them in the oven, I had no interest in eating them. I just wanted to make them. I realized, what am I doing? Baking is what makes me happy and is my go-to when I need to feel good or calm down. So why don't I just flip it around and make that the important part of my life? And so within a matter of 3 months, I quit banking and went to cooking school and haven't looked back.
And the whole world is happy that you did. How did your television career come about?
Oh, that's a fun question to ask, Harvey. It was a bit accidental and a combination of that and fortuitous timing. When the Food Network in Canada was just starting out, they needed to create Canadian content. We have rules here that you can't have 100% foreign content on a Canadian channel. And so in creating an assortment of TV shows, the network knew they wanted to create a baking program. And being so early on in the network days, when they put the call out on their website for people to audition, for pastry chefs across the country to audition, guess how many people applied?
Maybe 10?
No one. So they had to contract a headhunter who went out and found pastry chefs from across the country And because I had just published the In on the 20 cookbook with my husband, I had been doing a little bit of media, but not a whole lot. And I was invited not to host the show, but to audition. And so I went into the studio. I was terrified. And it was one of those pivotal moments where it would have been easier to say no and not do it because I was nervous. I didn't think television was going to be my thing. But you realize you don't regret those opportunities that you've tried and failed. You only regret the ones not taken. And so I had to bolster myself. Fortunately, I had the distraction when I went in for the audition that it was right before Christmas season. So we were terribly busy at the restaurant. So I didn't have time to get nervous. And on top of that, I remember I caught a horrible cold. So I was more focused on that. And I remember sitting in the makeup chair and thinking, well, at least I get hair and makeup out of this. That's kind of fun. And I went in, and because I was so not focused on the cameras and the performance, I just made my dessert and let it go. And I think that really helped. And so they came back, they said, oh, we'll call you in 2 weeks. 6 weeks goes by, and I get the phone call saying, we've selected you. And so I started with no experience. I had to learn how to speak to a camera. And someone in the human resources consulting business came up with a term I thought very appropriate to describe what I had to do. I have become an ambivert because I'm an introvert by nature. I'm very shy and quiet, but I've had to learn to speak publicly in front of big crowds, in front of a camera. I mean, I can see, Harvey, but usually when you're speaking into the lens, there's no one there to connect with. So you have to be able to find that connection. So I'm an ambivert, and it's been a fun journey to learn how to translate what I did professionally for years into a home baker version of a recipe to guarantee success. And I don't measure my success on what I can do. I measure my success on what you can do with my recipes. And if you feel good about what you've created, then that's a check mark for me.
Well, you may call yourself an ambivert. I call you a superstar because you're the whole package. When did it occur to you that you were not just a great chef, but an excellent teacher? Because that's what you're doing. You're teaching.
I don't know that I've been so introspective about it, but what I do love is the sharing. And I think that comes down to the nature of baking in general. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but I bring it right back to my grandmother. Her way of expressing love for her family, and when we spent time in the kitchen, was by making and sharing these desserts, by setting aside a certain amount of time to make something that's not a necessity, but it's that little something extra. And so I think it's that sense of sharing and giving. A dessert recipe, I used to say never serves one. It rarely serves one. Of course, we all know the hot thing on social media right now is the single cookie recipe or single cinnamon bun recipe so that you don't overeat. But for the most part, making baked goods is about that sense of sharing. So I think that teaching, and I love to see the empowerment, the journey that I went through, because I didn't actually specialize in baking when I went to cooking school. I did an associate degree in the States. They call it, I have an associate degree in applied science. So it sounds like I'm a culinary engineer, but I didn't study baking specifically. So that was an on-the-job apprenticeship. And I had to do a lot of trial and error. So when I was starting my apprenticeship and career, I would fill in when the pastry chef of the restaurant would take the day off. And I would simply get a checklist of this is what you have to make. Here's the restaurant manual with all the recipes. Figure it out and don't go home until everything on the list is done. And so I would wrestle through things. Things would go wrong, and I didn't have that resource of, well, why did my cake sink in the middle? Why did my custard curdle? And so I had to kind of wrestle through and research why myself, which is how the inspiration for ultimately what the new book is all about, is the hows and whys behind baking, so that could understand it, because then all of a sudden I became a better baker when I knew the difference between Dutch process and regular cocoa powder, and that acidity allows the proteins in flours to relax, which makes my pastry doughs roll more easily and thinner without breaking. So those little technicalities made such a difference. But I had to figure it out, and I want to share what I've learned along the way. Because, you know, Harvey, the day of holding back a secret ingredient or a special technique in a recipe is just so far behind us. Because if you Google chocolate cake right now, what are you going to find? 37 million chocolate cake recipes. There are no secrets anymore. It's all out there.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, that's what people want to learn. And that's a very good reason, even if they already have many of your books, as we do, to get the new one. Now, as you know, there's been a proliferation of cooking and baking competition shows on TV. You competed on Iron Chef Canada in 2018 and you won, which we were all very happy about. And you're a judge on the Great Chocolate Showdown and the Junior Chef Showdown. Anna, what do you think of these competition shows, and in particular, the enormous pressure that these young chefs are being subjected to?
Well, I have to say, first off, they choose to by signing up. So I think what I see from, I chose to be a judge on Chocolate Showdown and Junior Chef Showdown specifically because it was a bit, it's a safer, more positive environment. Some of the other ones can be a little edgy and tough, and I didn't want to take on a role about tearing someone down because they failed, but I wanted to explain to them and help them, guide them through to become better as they move along through the competition. And so I think the shows that involve home cooks and home bakers and kids are the most resilient generation. It's amazing because students, young people, are perpetual learners. They're in a constant state of learning. So when something goes wrong or they fail, or, you know, sadly, when they get voted off of the TV show, there's a moment of sadness, but I'll see them 2 hours later in the parking lot going, okay, bye, nice to see you. Like, they get over it. They're the best. And on Chocolate Showdown, we include teaching moments and lessons. And I think what's very important, a little inside information, is on these competition shows, I think the biggest pressure is the time restriction. When you're a home baker, and as you well know, Harvey, you've got a eager home baker in your household. You can spend all weekend working on one recipe or one cake, but when you're told you have to do it in 2.5 hours, that's where the pressure comes in. It's the time management. And where a professional chef lives for that, the home cook needs to figure out how to fit what they do in that time frame. But what you don't see, because we have to edit that episode that takes us 2 days to tape. It takes us 2 days to tape an episode of Great Chocolate Showdown because we need to give the bakers time to rest and recover between bakes. You can't do that all. They do two bakes in one show. It's too much in one day. But also, when you see us judging and tasting, what you don't see is we spend about half an hour with each baker after we've tasted it and talking about, okay, this is why your sauce didn't set. This is why your mousse is grainy, or this is why this looks perfect. We'll explain to you also why what you did works so well. And then it's amazing the growth they have. And by the time those who make it to the finale bake, they just, to see the look on their face whenever they step away from something they've created, that they know, you know, weeks earlier, they had no hope or wish to ever create something like that. That's the heartwarming part of it.
I know you have the YouTube channel. I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, but would you ever go back to hosting your own TV cooking show?
I would love to. The market on broadcast television leans towards the competition shows and the game shows right now, and that's fine. Everything goes through its cycle. And that is why I think sharing recipes is what I love to do most. So finding my audience through YouTube has allowed me to keep doing what I love doing, which is sharing trustworthy recipes with reliable information and continue doing that. It just happens to be a different platform. And who knows what's next around the corner, Harvey.
Well, I love your YouTube channel, Anna, not only for the recipes, but because we can post comments and ask you questions during your demonstrations. And I'm always amazed that people from all over the world who might be in a different time zone and who would normally be asleep during the show will tune in live so they can ask you questions. That must be so gratifying.
Harvey, it is so amazing. And I have such a fantastic and loyal group of viewers. And I love that sometimes when I'm doing a live stream, and they're usually average 45 minutes to an hour, that people off to the side are having their own chats about baking. And so someone from Greece is chatting with someone from the Philippines, who's chatting with someone from the UK, just, comparing their own little baking stories. We're just that engaged in the moment. For the live streams, finding a time of day that reaches everyone is always the challenge. So I've tried everything from 9 a.m. Eastern time to noon to early evening. And so we're trying to find that sweet spot so that you can catch as many people. But at least with a live stream, if you can't watch it live, you can always go on and watch later.
And we do. It's often said that cooking is an art, but baking is a science because you have to follow very specific recipes with exact weights and measures. But when I look at some of your creations and those of other pastry chefs like Jordi Roca and Albert Adria, it sure looks like artistry to me, don't you think?
Well, there is definitely an artistry side. And I know so many pastry chefs that come from an art school or photography background. So they see the world differently. And instead of oil paint or clay being their medium, it is fondant or chocolate. I mean, look at School of Chocolate on Netflix. It just, that hyper realism in chocolate work is phenomenal. That is an artist's eye that takes that. And I will be the first to say that while I have some decor skills, I do not have that level of artistry. And so I consider myself almost more of a technician, because I'll wrestle with a cake recipe or a frosting or a filling or a pastry recipe, the technical side of the recipe itself, more than I will the outside detail, because you need both. You need it to look enticing and beautiful and edible. And then you have to deliver on the promise. If you make it look so beautiful and it's flat inside, well, that's not so much fun.
Well, now, Anna, I want to talk with you now about your books. As I mentioned in my introduction, one of my favorite of all your books is Anna and Michael Olson Cook at Home, Recipes for Every Day and Every Occasion, which you wrote with your dear husband, Michael, who was a chef professor in the culinary program at Niagara College. Mm-hmm. I love the book because you actually created menus for the events in our lives. Everything from routine family dinners on weeknights to intimate dinner parties, children's birthday parties, large parties, and even what to cook when your boss comes over for dinner. How did you and Michael come up with the idea for that book?
Well, for that particular book, we simply reflected back on the previous few years and what inspired us and our favorite meals. And then we just simply documented that book just kind of flowed. And if I can drop a little hint, even though Baking Wisdom is just being released now, because it takes 2 years to write a cookbook and have it come out, sometimes a little longer, I'm already working on the next one, and it will be a full menu. It is not going to be all baking, and the approach is very much the same, except with a little more. It's amazing how, with life experience, with all of us having been home and cooking a lot more at home the last few years, our styles have changed, ingredient access has changed, inspiration has changed. So I know the next cookbook, while full menu, is going to look completely different from Cook at Home.
Well, I can't wait to get it, because the thing about that book in particular, because it is a full menu book, I feel like you're there with me. So when I'm making the beef bourguignon, I know you're right beside me, giving me every step so that if I have company coming, I know it's going to turn out well. That's the beauty of your book. You know, if you follow the instructions, it's going to come out right.
Well, thank you for those kind words. And I do make an effort when I write the recipe. It's not simply about the dry instructions. It is that little insight. And I try and flag those points that you might be nervous about. You know, if you're making something in the batter, you don't know, like, should the batter be runny? Should it be thick? And I try and give you a lot of the adjectives and signposts along the way, so you know you're doing okay. And also the warnings. If it does look like this, then do this. And so there's always a way out. And we have to be especially sensitive now. You know, we're seeing the cost of ingredients, especially baking ingredients. While not complicated, we're looking at things like butter and nuts and dried fruits and increase in price. And so you can't afford to have a mistake. So within Baking Wisdom, I try and include a lot of tips that if you do get yourself in trouble, this is how to back yourself out. So you don't have to throw something away and start again, like over whipped egg whites or over whipped cream. You don't have to throw it away and start again. I've got a fix for that.
Oh, that's amazing. Another one of your most popular books is In the Kitchen with Anna, New Ways with the Classics, because you've taken classic dishes like Cobb salad, lamb, and chicken cordon bleu, and you've enhanced them with new flavor combinations. My favorite is the Chardonnay sauce with the garlic roast turkey. How do you come up with all these ideas?
You know what? That's a question, Harvey, I don't know that I have an answer to. Sometimes it's a matter of function, just simply what you happen to have in the fridge, and give it a try and maybe it works. Others, it's understanding how flavor works and what you want to coax out of a dish. And, you know, do people get stuck a little bit with bland gravies and sauces sometimes? Maybe. So how can I help you with a little bit of Chardonnay or a zest of a lemon, all of a sudden bolster that flavor so that you're happier with it?
You're amazing. Your book entitled Set for the Holidays with Anna Olson, Recipes to Bring Comfort and Joy, won a Taste Canada Award, and I think I know why. Can I tell you?
Sure, you can tell me.
It's because this is just my opinion, but what sets that book apart from other Christmas cookbooks is that you provided recipes not only for the holiday meals and parties, but also you showed us things we can bake to give as gifts. And there's no better gift at Christmas than something homemade that you can eat. And that's delicious, don't you think?
Oh, I agree. Gifts from the kitchen make such a difference. So whether it's a little preserve or a cookie in a jar, or building that cookie tin with a nice assortment, I do think it's so meaningful. And with that book too, I also wanted to make practical sense. I didn't want it to be the kind of Christmas book that gets packed away with the decorations after Christmas and it doesn't come out again until the following December. I make use of leftovers, and there are also sort of practical year-round recipes that you can use within it too. I mean, maybe you're not going to make a fruitcake in July, but you can certainly make the lemon crumble loaf any time of the year.
And if anyone out there is still wondering whether they should get Anna Olson's holiday cookbook, let me tell you, there's 3 recipes alone that are worth the price of the book. Write this down: eggnog macaron, candy cane macaron, and chocolate orange macaron. Anna, I can't get enough of those.
Well, I'm glad you like them. They are my favorite festive flavors. And, you know, it's interesting. Making macaron is one of those tasks. The ingredients are not complicated. It's sugar, ground almonds, and egg whites. And yet it is all about the technique when it comes to making a proper macaron. And I have done the French method, which is just whipping the meringue straight. In Set for the Holidays, it's the Italian method. So you make an Italian meringue, you boil sugar, pour it into the whipping egg whites. In Baking Wisdom, I have actually settled on a Swiss meringue macaron method, which is not as common, but I have to say I get more of a consistent result. And then if I can also add, I have recipe testers. So when I design a recipe, and I just work by myself in the kitchen, and I find it's very important that I work just on my own. people say, oh, well, you must have someone taking notes for you or doing the dishes for you. I was like, well, the average home baker doesn't have that. So I need to do my own dishes so that I know how to be as efficient as possible. If I'm going to use 4 whisks, 3 spatulas, 7 bowls, and 2 baking pans, well, who's going to make that dish? So once I get a recipe to the point I like it, I send it to my 2 recipe testers. And because in Canada, we still use measures by volume, cups, half cup measures, teaspoons, etc. But the rest of the world uses metric weights. And we're gradually here in Canada improving and coming along with that. I include both styles of measurements. So I make sure they are tested both by weight and by volume. And I have a recipe tester who used to dread seeing the macaron recipe come in because she always struggled with it. And she is hooked on this Swiss method that is coming out in the new book. And I even get creative. I do the classic buttercream filling for it, but I also do there's a recipe for raspberry pâte à fouille, the raspberry jelly candy. Mm-hmm. And if you put that inside of a macaron, it is delicious.
Okay, that's a reason alone to get the new book. I was really impressed with your book entitled Baking Day with Anna Olson, because it's specifically designed to encourage families to spend time together in the kitchen baking, just like so many mothers of our generation and older generations did with their kids. That book came out during the pandemic, and it was a lifesaver for so many families. What perfect timing, Anna.
Well, I wish I could take credit for it, but the book was written before the pandemic started. It just, because it's such a slow process between the editing and the photos and design and printing, it came out during the pandemic, but it invited everybody to get into the kitchen. And whether you only had an hour or less, or you wanted to devote a full day to baking, I wanted you to sort of take a recipe and make a little baking project out of it with someone in mind, whether it was someone in the kitchen with you or someone you were making it for. And it really helped. And it was inspired by my younger audience who are fearless. Kids are fearless in the kitchen because, as we were talking about earlier, everything is a learning curve. Everything is new. So they don't know the difference between the difficulty between a chocolate chip cookie and a macaron. So let's make the pretty macaron, of course. But I noticed you don't want, in talking to kids don't need simplistic recipes. They just need clear instruction. And so I wanted to write this with Baking Day with kids in mind, but not make it a kid's book. It's meant to be a family book and treats that everyone will enjoy.
Yeah, that's just a wonderful book. Your brand new book, Anna Olson's Baking Wisdom, is a very comprehensive guide telling us everything we need to know to be a successful baker. And you've pointed out already some of the important tips that you've included in the book. I consider it kind of like a Bible for bakers. What inspired you to write that book?
It was the title. The title always comes last when it comes to writing a cookbook. So my publisher, who was a dear friend, he has been my publisher since our very first, the In on the 20 cookbook. That came out in 1995. We shot the photos on film. That's how long ago it was. And so as I was putting, he wanted a real compendium, a complete baking book. And as I was putting it together, I found that I kept adding these long bits of notes and advice. And also during the pandemic, when I was doing my live streams, seeing that some of my most popular live streams were things like making croissant from scratch. I was like, okay, I need to really put some insight into it. And so that body of advice, we were just throwing it around in emails back and forth, going, oh, well, this little bit of wisdom, this little bit of wisdom. And so that's how the title Baking Wisdom came about. But we pulled the big content, the big bits of wisdom, and put it at the front of the book, which is about a quarter of the book. And then we left the recipe specific tips within. So you can see the front part of the book, all the bits of wisdom, the pages are in a different color. And then every recipe references some bit of advice in the front of the book. And then within the recipe, right at the moment when you're making something, so not off to the side so you might miss it, But, if I'm talking to you about whipping egg whites and how egg whites without sugar whip fat to volume faster than eggs with sugar, I'm going to put that note right at the method step where you're whipping egg whites so you don't miss it. So it really is meant to be a reference. For those who remember encyclopedias, you would toggle back and forth between different pages. And so that's why we put 2 bookmarks in the book. So you can ribbon your recipe and you can mark the relevant wisdom at the front of it so you can go back and forth easily and not lose your spot.
I think it's a perfect book for bakers and also to give as gifts to people who fancy themselves as bakers but may not have all of that wisdom in one place. Can I tell you my favorite Anna Olson recipe?
Please do.
Well, it's actually a tie between your lemon coconut cake and your giant glazed cinnamon bun. Those are my 2.
Oh, completely different desserts. So it's not like they're even close. That lemon coconut cake. Oh, it's so funny. I hear about recipes that, because I'm always creating new recipes, it's a nice reminder. I remember that. And it's nice, isn't it? It's got all the coconut on the outside, but the lemon filling in between, and a light chiffon spongy cake. Oh, I might have to make that.
It's so delicious. And I just wonder whether you really get, deep down, do you get how many people are celebrating what you do in their homes without you ever knowing, but just enjoying a really great meal or a dessert because of you?
Well, I don't think on it a lot, but it makes me happy to know that other people feel good about themselves when they create something. And if it excites them and wants them to bake more or try something new, then, and I've been a part of instilling that confidence, then that's my job done. And it is what inspires me to keep writing. So people think, well, do you ever run out of ideas? Well, there's always something new to learn. You never stop learning. And if I ever feel I'm no longer curious, then I have to reevaluate what I'm doing altogether. So I love this journey. And it helps that my husband is a chef. He's a chef professor at Niagara College. So the conversation around our house is pretty much food nonstop. We pick our travel destinations, our holiday destinations, solely based on food. The most recent trip coming up will be Mexico City. Very excited about that. That is just to actually truly explore real, authentic Mexican cuisine and appreciate the culture tied to it. I think will be fascinating.
But that being said, you're a strong believer in cooking and baking with locally sourced and regional ingredients, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and living here in the Niagara region affords a great deal of privilege when it comes to accessing ingredients so close to the source. When you can actually go to a farm gate stand and buy fresh in-season peaches, knowing they were picked within days, and to move with the seasons. It's a lesson to share with everyone, because yes, we're lucky that in 2023, we can buy strawberries 365 days a year, or blueberries 365 days a year. But to appreciate that locally, they have a season and they are at their best in, June into early July. And, it's not until you get that first local berry, you realize, oh, the ones I was eating in January were not actually the best. And you start to lean, and I find my cravings are based on whatever is in season. And my simple rule that I ascribed to Fresh with Anna Olson, the series and the book of the same name, was simply what grows together goes together. So when you look at global cuisines, what ingredients people cook with in Italy or in France or in Thailand has to do with what is available to them at the same time. So the idea of putting sage with fresh tomatoes doesn't make sense, but fresh basil with tomatoes, well, that makes perfect sense, because sage is, the herb that stays in your garden, or rosemary, after the weather gets cold, and you put it in dishes to draw out the flavor slowly. So roasting, braising, where fresh basil is best suited to those fresh ingredients. And so you find there's this natural harmony that comes from, and this is how cultural cuisines, you know, we struggle here in Canada with our culinary identity. Well, you can't force it. It has to just happen naturally. I will put an argument out there that a butter tart is a pretty darn good Canadian dessert, though.
I've been dying to ask you, Anna, what's your opinion of all the new keto recipes out there? Have you ever tasted a keto product that tasted any good?
I've not tried any pre-prepared or prepared keto products. I have educated myself on understanding the keto diet somewhat, but you're pretty much without any sugar at all. You're pretty limited in the baking world. What I love exploring is vegan baking, because to take conventional baking that is so dependent on dairy and eggs, and to pull those two ingredients out, but find other ingredients that scientifically do the same thing. Cakes lift, cakes bond, flavor is there, crumb structure is there. I find that just an amazing exploration.
And what about gluten intolerance these days? You just see so many people with gluten intolerance. Have you had to become an expert at gluten-free cooking and baking?
I have had to play a lot. And in baking day specifically, because that is about family baking. And if you have an allergy or an intolerance in your household of any type, I tested a lot of my products with a gluten-free alternatives and a basic homemade one. What I do love now that we understand these allergies and intolerances so much better, I'm finding the substitution products on the market are just far more reliable, and you get successful results when you're doing a substitution. So there's certain brands out there that are very, very good and not overly expensive. It used to be, even just 5 years ago, harder to find those options or be confident in what the end result would be. And I find it's so much easier now.
A lot of chefs either do savory cooking or they pursue a career in baking. Is there any advantage to being a generalist in today's competitive world?
Well, I mean, anytime you have more skills, that helps you. What I found was by studying cooking before I went into baking, and then conversely looking at how I cook after becoming a baker, the overlap was noticeable, because I found after baking specifically, I could push the boundaries on my cooking a lot more because I understood the science behind how these ingredients work. And so that made a big difference for me in terms of my creative cooking. And then I found a great deal of comfort with some savory ingredients, introducing it into the baking world. So things like a roasted garlic pastry cream. In Baking Wisdom, I have a recipe for a potato tarte tatin, which I would invite anyone to try. So it's kind of like pamana is a classic French potato dessert, thinly sliced potatoes cooked in butter. So it crisps up on the surface and it's soft underneath, except I make it like apple tatin. So I cook it in the pan, browning the potatoes upside down, beautifully fanned, and then I put a piece of puff pastry on it. My background's Eastern European, so a carb with a carb makes me very, very happy. And it is a delicious, you can serve it as an appetizer course with an olive tapenade or a side salad, or it makes just an elegant side dish if you were doing, say, a roast of any type.
Oh, I can't wait to try that. If you could meet one world famous chef who's no longer with us, who would it be?
Oh, I know it may be overspoken, but boy, Julia Child. The way she brought French cooking to the North American palate, and her demeanor and the way she loved sharing her recipes. That's just all she wanted to do, was share what she loved about French cooking with the world. I think is admirable. She would be someone, and she had a baking series on PBS, I think simply called Baking with Julia. And that came out at a time when I was just on that baking exploration myself. It was so perfectly timed. And that's where I took encouragement and inspiration when I was shaping my own culinary identity. And so that's who I channel when I'm sharing my own recipes.
Well, I totally get that because you're channeling her warmth as well as her knowledge, and it's very comforting. The baking itself is comforting, but having you on TV talking to us in such an intimate way, as if you're talking just to one person, is warm, and it's very compelling television. So I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
I want to tell our viewers that you can learn more about Anna Olson by going to her official website, annaolson.ca. You can also follow her on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe to her YouTube channel, Oh Yum with Anna Olson. Well, Anna, I have only one more question for you, and it's very important. Are you ready?
Okay, I'm ready.
How in the world do you maintain such a beautiful figure when you're constantly baking and I assume eating the most fattening foods in the world?
Well, I will tell you, I'll be right back. Don't worry, I'm not going far away. I'm in my refrigerator right now, but this is what lives in my fridge. I've got an apple cranberry pie because I was taping it the other day, and I've got 6 creme brulee sitting there just waiting to be eaten. But I'll be truthful that when I'm developing a recipe and it's time to taste, because of course you have to taste it, I'm tasting critically and analytically. It's not like I'm savoring a slice of cheesecake with a friend and a cup of tea. And so it doesn't have that same comfort appeal in that moment. I may find it later, but when you're constantly producing, I just basically have to get this out. So would you like a pie, Harvey?
Oh, I was just going to ask you if I could apply to be one of your recipe testers.
Oh, I have lots of volunteers for taste testers. I have some happy neighbors too.
Well, Miss Anna Olson, I have to tell you that despite all the millions of calories you've brought into my life, my partner Steve and I absolutely adore you, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to appear on our show.
Well, I really thank you for inviting me, Harvey. It's nice to meet your audience, and extensive audience. And yeah, I know that we'll be in touch, and you never know, there might be a pie delivered to your door sometime soon.
I can't wait. I'd love to meet you in person. Our guest has been the undisputed queen of baking, the fabulous Chef Anna Olson. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver, my wonderful managers, Rick and Robin at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.